Okay, so the closed guard is a great position for reducing somebody's mobility, but for my money as an old fuck, it doesn't do enough to keep somebody from being able to keep their arm frames in your way and pop up to their feet and still use a fair bit of athletic advantage. So what we actually want to do, if possible, when we're playing closed guard, is migrate our control so that we're not just wrapped around the hips, but so we're also controlling the shoulder. To that effect, we're going to utilize the shoulder clamp. Probably the easiest way to show you how to enter this is if somebody's got their hands on the hips, and we utilize this sort of elbow flaring, where you can see how like your wrist was basically about to fold over, so people will generally allow their arm to come over. If it does, then great, we can just move underneath like we're throwing an underhook. If their arm doesn't, if it just kind of stays put, then we can just slide our arm underneath like so. So we're basically creating an underhook on the same side, so the mirror image, or the mirror side. So my right shoulder to your left shoulder. The clamping mechanism is going to involve me bringing my forearm up into your armpit and to the back of your deltoid, and then bring my chin over your triceps. The reason I need to do that is if I'm just holding here, you can simply swim your arm all the way out of the position. No matter how tight my clamp is here, there's always going to be the possibility of somebody just bringing their arm back into, or the shoulder back into a neutral alignment. Whereas as I start to do this, if I bring my chin, my ear, my jaw, basically anything over your triceps near your elbow, it'll be much tougher for you to rotate your elbow back to neutral. I'm trying to internally rotate your shoulder by basically twisting your elbow, and then eventually we're going to attack some submissions from here. But the initial phase of this is to just make sure that I'm blocking your ability to bring your arm back. And so to that extent, when my forearm cuts into the back of your deltoid, I need to focus on bringing my chin or my jaw or my shoulder towards your elbow, but also keeping my elbow elevated above your elbow. My goal is to ideally have your shoulder below your elbow, which is what's actually providing the clamp. If your elbow is below your shoulder, you will be able to bring your arm back into a neutral position. And if you can bring your head back over my head, that's also going to allow you to bring your arm back into a neutral position. So as soon as I get underneath here, I'm trying to get to the side as much as possible. I can keep my guard closed and make little adjustments the whole time we do this, or as long as I'm watchful for my knee position, I don't drop my knees to the side so you can step over them, I should be able to make little hip adjustments here like this, and I'm eventually going to turn this into an arm lock. But if you like hug my head a little bit, it's going to be hard for me to arm lock you just right off the bat. But if we're talking about restricting your mobility, we're talking about you not being able to pop up to your feet and do any crazy athletic young person movement, this is about as good as it gets. I'm turning the palm of my hand away. So like a good heuristic here is the arm that you're going to reach in, check your watch on that side. That's how you know this is a series for old people, because we're actually talking about wearing watches. Right? So however I got my arm underneath of Stephan's arm, I'm emphasizing blocking as close to the elbow as possible so that he can't bring his arm back to neutral, and I'm emphasizing there's that checking the watch motion. I'm clamping down on his shoulders as close as I can to the deltoid, and I'm raising my shoulder and my elbow to create the angle as I do this. I'm driving his shoulder down, and it should be very difficult for him to just extract from this, especially in the gi where there's a lot of friction. In no-gi, people will still occasionally turn their elbow and suck their arm out, but in the process of doing that, as they go like this, they are potentially giving us a back attack, so it's not even as clear. And we'll talk about this cross-arm position later on, so I don't want to teach the back attack right now, but one of the ways we'll end up there is from a failed shoulder clamp. So as long as I'm here and I'm really shrugging my shoulder, we talked about this shoulder sort of poking position with the underhook. It's the same basic mechanism. I'm driving my shoulder up. And so even without the clamp part, can you return your arm into that neutral position? Like with difficulty, right? Same thing sort of here. It should be very difficult. Once I add the shoulder clamp in, it should be next to impossible again, especially in the gi. And I will occasionally be pushing my partner's head away, but I'm really more emphasizing raising my elbow and my shoulder and having your shoulder below your elbow. And so this is sort of our launching point. This is basically the closed guard for old fucks, is get yourself here. And really anybody, this is awesome because my strongest mechanisms are pointed at Stephan. His structure is broken, his posture is broken, his base is not great. I'm going to be able to be fairly effective from here. He's not going to be very effective regardless of his, youth and vigor advantage over me. So this is our launching point. Get yourself to here, and everything else is going to be a lot easier.
I think a lot of people, when they do this, they try and cut down on the triceps as opposed to the shoulder.
Yeah.
And having your forearm cutting into the deltoid
It's
really does.
massive difference. It changes the angle of the shoulder and it changes how much lever control I have. When I try to clamp down at the triceps, your shoulder articulation is entirely, your responsibility. I've got very little to do with it. Once I start to come up here, your shoulder articulation is no longer your purview, it's mine. I control it. My chin is tight, my shoulder is up. I've got way more, I'm controlling the source of the lever at the shoulder and I'm controlling the end of the lever at the elbow. And by blocking a little bit of the forearm, I'm creating a little bit of that internal rotation. So when all of these things work together, we've got an incredibly robust control lever-wise of the shoulder, and we've got direct clamp-based control of the hip. So there's very little that somebody can do offensively to break your guard, to pass your guard. They basically are stuck completely defending this attack. Whether you turn it into a finish or a sweep or whatever is almost irrelevant. It's the fact that the other person is at such a tremendous disadvantage, and all you have to do is isometrically hold them there and make little adjustments, which is what makes this work so well for older, slower people. All right, now that we've found ourselves in this sort of shoulder clamp here, we're going to look to attack the reverse armbar. Cutting armbar, razor armbar, it's got a couple different names. But basically, the essence of the movement is migrating the control that I have with my forearms at the shoulder and moving that back to the elbow. I can do this by just sliding my wrist into position if I've got a fair bit of sensitivity, or I can do it by literally just using the palm of my hand to make sure that I'm controlling your elbow. As you get more and more experienced with this position, if I can just get back in, as you get more and more experienced, you'll be able to do this with just your biceps or just your forearm. When you're in the development phase, probably the best way to do it is to keep your top arm, so that the arm that would have been cutting in, in this case, my left forearm, at the shoulder, keep your top arm there, maintaining the shrug, and then travel back to the elbow with your other hand. So I've still got a fair bit of redundancy in this, right? I've got one hand controlling the shoulder, I've got the other hand controlling the elbow, I've got the shoulder shrugging, so I make sure that it's hard for you to create rotation, and then I'm going to use my knees against your ribs or your shoulder for distance control as I push myself away. I don't want to go like this, and then I've lost the framing, and then you just drive back into me and center up in my guard. So once I gain this control, I'm going to try to bring my foot onto your hip on this side, and I'm going to try to bring my foot onto your hip on this side so that I can start to slide back while I focus on turning your elbow. You may notice that I'm keeping my abdomen and my hips away from you. Quite commonly, people associate the armbar with bridging, so they're like, time to bridge. This is the opposite direction that I want. This is called a reverse armbar, so think of this as the reverse of an armbar. Rather than hipping in, I'm going to hip away. I've migrated to the elbow, whether I've got the palm on palm style, whether I've got the forearm, or whether I've got more of the biceps and the elbow. This is the one I use myself because I've developed this quite a bit, so I've got a lot of sensitivity in this part of my body. Forearm, bicep, I can kind of feel where Stephan's elbow is. I also think it's probably the tightest. But again, as a beginner, you're probably going to want to be holding the elbow at first. And now I'm going to think of abducting my hips. So I'm basically hip escaping away from him while keeping my knees checking his body. And I'll be hugging his arm into my chest. So I want my chest to disappear. If my chest is close, I'm bracing his arm. I'm providing a support for it, so I'm never going to break it. I want to move away and hug that arm into this open space that I'm creating. So I'm basically doing this. This is not as mechanically powerful as a normal armbar. A normal armbar, where I'm doing this, I've got base from the ground, and I've got my glutes, my quads, my core involved. This is a very physically powerful mechanism, but that's when we're talking about doing it from the mount. From the guard, my feet are not touching the ground, they're touching the air, so it's not as powerful. But just classically speaking, the arm bar, where someone's on their back and I'm doing this, is very, very powerful. This less so, because I'm pulling my hips away and I'm crunching. So I'm relying on a crunching mechanism versus a bridging mechanism. You're definitely not going to crunch as much weight as you would bridge. So just keep that in mind, that if you're a little bit off in your technique, you're much less likely to get the result that you want. So I've already got a little bit of internal rotation. I grab the elbow if I need to, and I make sure that I've got it. And then I move my partner's wrist, I don't move their wrist is already where it is. I move my shoulder and my neck and my ear and the side of my jaw into this position where I'm clamping almost like a vice. And if we can do this, I want to clamp the side of my head against your wrist, and my shoulder against your wrist on either side. So if you wanted to rotate your arm now, it'd be very difficult to do, especially combined with the pressure that I'm using to rotate this way, and especially with the pressure that I can be adding with my knee or knees pinching your shoulder in place here. So I'm really restricting your shoulder as I start to move my hips back. So even just removing my knees from the equation, you feel how much less control I have over your shoulder as I pinch my knees in. I've taken a lot of the slack out. So, if you've got the submission formula, which if you don't, check it out. We talk a lot about removing the slack, controlling all of the joints, maximizing our force production through pounds per square inch into a smaller area. All of that stuff is involved in maximizing how we break someone's arm. So in this case, really immobilizing the shoulder, stretching the arm, and putting as much focus on a narrow or a small fulcrum at the elbow is going to help us achieve a break, which may otherwise be difficult to achieve because we don't have the same inherent mechanical advantage.